The sound isn't of bombs, but of paper being signed under the humid heat of a wooden deck. It is 1842 on the Yangtze River. Chinese officials in silk robes that seem too heavy for defeat bow their heads before men in red coats with eyes as cold as the steel of their bayonets. The Treaty of Nanking is being sealed. There is no panic in the streets, but there is a terrifying silence. A millennia-old civilization has just been bent by a fleet that came from the other side of the world just to guarantee the right to sell poison. Hong Kong is handed over. The horizon, once vast and free for the locals, is now made of British iron and smoke. How did a small island, once a forgotten Roman province, have the audacity to decide who could trade, who should pay tribute, and who would be wiped off the map? What is the secret of a force that doesn't need to be everywhere at once? Because the fear of it already occupies every space. What we are witnessing is not just a war, but the crystallization of the British Empire, the largest and most complex power structure ever assembled by the human species. It wasn't a sudden event, but a continuous rupture. For nearly 4 centuries, Great Britain didn't just conquer land, it hijacked the global economy. At its peak in 1921, the empire covered a quarter of the planet. 1 in 4 human beings on Earth woke up and went to sleep under laws dictated by London. This wasn't the tragedy of a single battle, but the irreversible consequence of an ambition that treated the ocean as its private property. It was the moment humanity stopped living on isolated islands and became cogs in a single imperial machine, where progress on one side was paid for with silence and submission on the other. Popular vision tells us that Britain was a fragile, isolated island that took to the sea out of desperation. That is a comfortable lie. When the empire began to take shape, England was experiencing a peak of intellectual and financial sophistication. It was the world of Newton and the Royal Society. Internal political stability and the flowering of a revolutionary banking system created a solid foundation. They weren't barbarians seeking pillage. They were strategists seeking efficiency. The contrast is brutal. While London shone with new libraries, theaters, and the luxury of spices, it meticulously planned how to extract the last drop of wealth from lands its rulers would never set foot on. The pinnacle of Western civilization was built upon the exact planning of the downfall of all others. The world of the 17th and 18th centuries was a chessboard of fierce mercantilism. Economics wasn't about the free market, it was about monopoly. Interconnectivity was being forged by trade routes linking Caribbean sugar to Virginian tobacco and Indian textiles. The ideas of Locke and Adam Smith circulated alongside shipments of tea, but this network of success was also a trap. The very structure of British prosperity, its dependence on foreign markets, paved the way for the need for total control. If trade was the island's lifeblood, the Navy had to be the heart that pumped that influence by force. Globalization was born, not from a handshake, but from an exclusivity contract guaranteed by 24-pounder cannons. The origin of this colossal dominion is invisible to the eyes of generals. It was born in the biology of plants and the greed of investors. Take your mind to the Spice Islands or the poppy fields of India. The original problem was distance and the inability to control supply. The process was purely logistical. How to bring tea from China without paying in silver? How to ensure Indian cotton fed the factories of Manchester without competition? The answer was the creation of something superhuman, the Royal Charter Companies. The East India Company wasn't just a business, it was a corporate sovereign state. It had its own army, its own currency, and its own justice system. The empire began as a private investment, where profit was the only metric and compassion was considered an accounting error. The gateway to this strategic tragedy was the port. Calcutta, Singapore, Cape Town. These locations were the wounds through which local sovereignty bled out. Treat every British port as an outpost of modernity and terror. The moment the first British trading post received authorization to operate, local culture began to die. The port was the sensory point of contact. The smell of tar, the clanking of anchor chains, and the imposing sight of frigates on the horizon. It was the final frontier. Once the port was controlled, the hinterland, the interior of the country, inevitably became dependent. British civilization didn't march in, It negotiated its way in, until there was nothing left to negotiate but surrender. The spread was a mathematical escalation. From Singapore to Hong Kong, from Bombay to Alexandria, the speed at which the Royal Navy mapped the world was the speed at which the empire grew. The impotence of native rulers was absolute. Warships appeared out of nowhere, demanding market openings under threat of bombardment. Confusion reigned. How do you fight an enemy you don't see coming, who doesn't want your land to live on, but only your resources to export? Social collapse followed the railroad. Where the tracks arrived, autonomy died. Telegraph communications, the All-Red Line, allowed London to move troops across continents in weeks, something no previous empire had ever dreamed of. The silence of Indian villages after the passage of British tax collectors was the sound of imperial efficiency. Local populations tried to resist with what they had, faith and tradition. The Sepoy Mutiny in India is the ultimate example of human reaction against British insensitivity. Local soldiers, feeling betrayed and disrespected in their deepest beliefs, rose up in panic and fury. The British reaction was a moral miscalculation that would stain their history. The punishment was not just death, but public humiliation, strapping rebels to cannons to be blown apart. The British belief in their civilizing mission was their greatest blindness. They genuinely believed they were bringing order to chaos, never realizing that their order was everyone else's chaos. The attempt to educate local elites to serve the empire ironically created the leaders who would one day tear it down. Moral collapse manifested in the breaking of the most fundamental bonds. During the great famines of Bengal or Ireland, imperial institutions continued to export grain while people died in ditches. Fear of the other created a social caste system where the Briton was the invisible and unreachable ruler. Reports from officers describe the abandonment of any pretense of justice in the name of maintaining prestige. The law didn't exist to protect man, but to protect property. Collective hysteria occurred in exclusive settler clubs, where the fear of a native uprising justified increasingly brutal laws of repression. The empire, which took pride in its laws, became their greatest violator outside its own island. Desperation spawned radical resistance movements. From the Mahdi in Sudan to the secret societies in China, the search for a spiritual solution against British material dominance turned into fanaticism. The British, in turn, radicalized their quest for control. Where diplomacy failed, collective punishment was the rule. Entire groups were punished for individual acts of resistance. The search for culprits led to the creation of criminal tribes categories in India. People who, according to British bureaucracy, were born with a criminal inclination. This is the darkest point, when the imperial administrator stops seeing the human being and starts seeing only a risk statistic that needs to be neutralized. The empire transformed the Earth's ecology. Wheat fields gave way to rubber and tea plantations. Villages that had existed for 1,000 years were swept away to make room for railroads that carried everything to the sea. Nature reclaimed space only where the British economy decided there was no more profit. In Australia and Canada, indigenous populations saw their lands transformed into pastures for imperial cattle, while their languages and traditions vanished into the invisible world of memory. The scale of devastation was not just physical, it was existential. The rural world became an open-air factory, where the rhythm of the sun was replaced by the rhythm of the London clock and stock exchange quotes. The retreat was not a victory of conscience, but an exhaustion of resources. 2 world wars transformed the United Kingdom from the world's creditor into a desperate debtor. Financial disaster was the end of imperial appetite. We began to see the sun setting, not by choice, but for lack of fuel. The moment India declared independence in 1947 marked the beginning of the end. It wasn't a peaceful goodbye. It was a rushed retreat that left behind poorly drawn borders and nations in flames. The exhaustion of the colonial system revealed that Britain never had real control over people's hearts, only over their ports and pockets. The post-British Empire world is the world we live in today. Modern national economies still follow the tracks of railroads built for export. The legal system, the lingua franca of trade, and even global sports are the wreckage of this leviathan. The transformation was permanent, The New World was born with scars that refused to close. The partition of India and Pakistan, the conflict in Israel and Palestine, the division of Africa. All of these are direct legacies of decisions made in gentlemen's clubs in London. The empire changed the human mind. It created the idea of a global market, but at the cost of a cultural diversity that will never be recovered. Today, we look at Royal Navy maps and think they belong to a dead past. But look around you. The same undersea cables that carry your data today follow the same routes as the British telegraph cables of 1900. Power has changed hands, from steel to silicon, but the logic of control and influence remains the same. Have we learned that total dominance is just an expensive illusion? The British Empire leaves us with a haunting question. When our own global network of influence finally fails, what will remain of us besides ruins and a language that everyone speaks, but no one respects anymore? Are we ready for the twilight of our own time? Looking at the British Empire is not looking at the victory of a people, but at the mechanics of a system that shaped us all. Understanding the roots of the past is the only way not to get lost in the roots of the future. History is a map that is never finished being drawn, and each era leaves its deep mark on the next. Follow me to the next era, where new empires attempt the impossible, while time, silent and impartial, waits to cover everything with the sands of oblivion.